Mics are hot.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight on Everything Matters. I'm really excited about the show tonight, and we've been kind of in a season of some crazy things going on in our society, so I'm hoping we can kind of jump into that. But I want to start tonight by, every night I start kind of let you know where we got the name Everything Matters and why we talk about it. Growing up for me, I grew up in the church, grew up as a pastor's kid. Most of my life was kind of based around this idea that everything was just in the spiritual realm. Like if there was something going wrong, pray about it, read the Bible, and that was like good. And those things are good. I think I appreciate that part of me. But as I got older, as I became a pastor myself, I realized there was more to the things that are going on in life. There was the spiritual, there was these emotional things, and there's these practical things that all kind of weave together as a part of my experience as a human. And I saw that with other humans. And seeing how God would work and weave through all those different things of the emotional, practical, and spiritual has kind of brought me to this place about how everything matters. And so on this show, we get into all sorts of things, from talking about politics to scripture to philosophy to you name it. We kind of hop into those things. So tonight's no exception to that. We're going to be talking about reconciliation and unity. And I have two great guests tonight. I'm really excited to have Janek, who is, I would say, former state senate and House, both those things, right?
Yes.
Yes. We'll kind of get into some of your experience there. And my buddy Sam Vaugh, who I call our missionary to El Salvador. But you also worked for many years in water, right?
Still do.
Still a consultant in water. And so there's some places where these guys have crossed paths and done some things. So tonight, I think you guys, like me, have been experiencing, we've been talking about a lot, how our society, in our last show we went into this too, there was a little bit of residual from that, but we were kind of on these different paths of different groups, and then all of a sudden, maybe in the last, I don't know how many years, it seems like we went to some serious divisiveness, and I think for most of us, at least in this room, going like, wow, like almost how did we get here, like, man, that happened fast, that guy's got a trident over there type of thing. Like, this is getting kind of intense. And obviously we just went through another election season, and we're still having follow-ups and all these different kinds of things, and both sides still all do their stuff. So I thought we'd kind of just dive into that. And part of it, Kyle, I'd love to hear from you a little bit, just because I watch this, and I'll be honest with you, and I may represent a lot of people. When I look at politics, I've become somewhat cynical. And I don't want to be that way, but I think some of my way out of that has been talking with you and others who have been in politics. It's continues to kind of restore my faith in humans. So I'd love for you to just tell me a little bit of your experience. What does it be like for you as because you were elected, how many elections did you go through?
Every 2 years, starting in 1991, which was a losing effort for the House of Representatives. And then in 2002, Senate seat came open. My state senator was retiring, who was one of the, if you will, one of the godfathers of water law in Texas.
Right.
And I ran for that and won, and then those are 4-year terms.
Yeah.
So a few, including I got my first loss out of the way, get that out early. And
got the loss out of the way. Were you wins everywhere besides the first
I did.
loss? Yeah?
I did.
So you get a pretty good record then. That's pretty good. So what is it like? I mean, how was it the first time when you lost? Well, that must have been...
It was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
You put everything you have into it. Now, I was single, no kids, so it was, I didn't have some of those important responsibilities that can make it even more difficult.
Right.
And so you put everything you've got into it, and it all comes down to one night. Mm-hmm. And so it was close, and I think I announced 2 weeks later, that it was so much fun, I'm going to do that again, and start again. But it was
crazy.
Very rewarding.
Yeah, so then the other ones that you won, tell me what it's like, because I think this is when I'm beginning. So you're running against people, I think you know a lot of these people, you're seeing each other at the Capitol and other places like that, and then do you have to figure out how to work together after that? I mean, there's...
Sure. And to some extent, most folks that are running for public office, and it will vary wildly depending on the level. Okay, it gets more aggressive when you start to go to the national level, I think, and everybody understands. We're going to duke it out, but when the clock runs and the game is over, we'll shake hands.
Right.
Sometimes we won't shake hands, and there's all sorts of sports metaphors that carry over because sometimes it really does get personal with people. Yeah. But it's changed since 1991 when I ran the first time. There's just so many issues have become nationalized,
right.
And then it's not Republican versus Democrat, then it becomes Texas versus California. And that's even easier to demonize because there's more people around you and wherever you are in your daily existence who will say, oh, yeah, California, we're crazy.
Hey,
that sort of thing.
hey, I'm from California.
I do some funny looks from the producer. I suspect that I will now be phased out of this.
I'm really trying to be. I want to have the Texan badge so bad. I was born in Florida, grew up in California, but I so badly I want to be part of the Texan crew so bad. So
you are. All you have to say is, I got here as quick as I could.
I'd say it all the time.
You say I got here as quick as I could, and all sins are forgiven.
I've been taught well, and I love Texas. Well, that's fascinating. Now, you guys you were working with water and some of the bills that were really important, and we were talking a little bit before, Sam. Tell us about some of what you've done and how that relates to some of the. And we didn't know this until we sat down together tonight, and we didn't know about this. But tell me a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, in the political world, I'm just John Q. Public,
right.
But in my professional life, one of the things I have an opportunity to do is actually to implement some really good legislation.
Yeah.
And it's some stuff that Kyle worked on. Regional water planning that builds up to a state water plan that now has created a funding mechanism so that communities can get lower interest loans to develop projects that are vital for their communities. And so a lot of my consulting career over the last 20 years has been effectively implementing some good legislation.
Wow.
And Kyle was also in the Senate at a time when a major water bill for environmental flows, kind of sorting out, the water that's in the river. Well, people got to drink, industry's got to run,
right.
Fishermen got to fish, and
right.
Kayakers got to kayak, and all those things go together. And Texas is one of the first, not the first, but a leading state in the country to implement environmental flow standards, and that's another privilege or opportunity I had to be on science committees implementing good legislation. So it's kind of cool.
Let me say that's another example of where these things cut across party lines.
They do.
This is when you take our most fundamental physical needs, food and water, and you take the most important, which is water, because your food isn't going to take you very far if you don't have water to grow it, all that sort of thing. Most folks listening to this may not know or have any idea of the history of some of these things. I know I didn't until I got to the legislature. And what you find out that now this cuts across, this is urban versus rural. The big cities are going to come take the river water that we've got in our part of the state, if you're in East Texas, that sort of thing. And when you stop and consider that this has been worked out by people of good faith, small case F and large case F, in such a fashion that of course it made the news, but there weren't riots in the street, right? There weren't brawls in the House of Representatives or on the floor of the Senate, because people of good faith work these things out, even though their interests are very diverse.
Right.
So you get the folks, Sierra Club, they're working alongside, saying, okay, Dow Chemical, which is one of the very important employer in my Senate district, and everybody gets together and work those things out. That actually can be a model for how some of these things can get resolved.
Well, is that is that why you get into politics? Is this for you? I mean, it's easy to look at people and say, well, this is their motivation. They want money. They want to be powerful. They want to be whatever. I mean, we see it all the time. But I mean, you've lived it and done it. Like, what was your? And I've known Sam for a long time. It's so cool that you guys have worked on this together. We had no idea, but I think it's easy for us to kind of say, "Well, this is their motivation." But when I hear you talk, I want to help people. I want to do these things to bring people together. It feels like that.
Yeah, that's your stump speech.
Right.
When you talk about how I want to help people and help mankind, I'm just here to do the best I can, put me in the game, coach. Interestingly, it wasn't until I had a serious sit down with the Holy Spirit when I looked back on my political career and realized I could say that was all good motivations and people applaud, all that sort of thing. I liked it.
Yeah.
And my arrogance said, I'm smarter than the average bear or than that guy. I can do better than that guy or that person. It's nonsense. That's just arrogance.
Right.
And it makes me look backwards at that political career with a whole different lens than I had at the time.
It's nice that you're out of it. You can kind of say those things, right? It's easier place to be like, I did that. Here's how I'm looking back at it. That's really, really interesting.
That's wonderful wisdom, Kyle. Thank you.
It really is.
It really, really is.
It really is.
Hard learned, but
Well,
he didn't leave me with a whole lot of wiggle room on that one.
Yeah. But I think that's to the point about the demonization and, we talk about social media, is it's really easy to make people a meme or another number or just another politician. But when you get into, I had some motives, but I also had some stuff for me, and people are real about it. I love that. I'm so drawn to that whole idea. So I had written up some stuff. I've been wrestling through this issue for a while, and I've been reading the story of Jacob and Esau, and I love the story of Jacob and Esau. It's the whole narrative of it in Genesis is fascinating to me, and just their relationship. And if you know the story of Jacob and Esau, Jacob steals the blessing from him. They're twins. This whole thing, and there's a lot of deception going on. But essentially, Jacob steals the blessing, and then takes off because his family's mad at him and people are going to kill him. Well, 20 years later, he comes back, and you see this kind of setting where it's this very made-for-TV moment where they hug and they weep. It's Genesis 33:4. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him, and they threw their arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Like, beautiful scene, right, of like that kinds of stuff. But then after that, you see Jacob and Esau going right back to just deceiving and hating each other. They don't see each other again until Isaac, their dad's funeral, which I think oftentimes kind of my premise, a lot of the stuff that I've been kind of wrestling through is I think reconciliation for me often is, even sometimes in the media or even in our own lives, billed as an event rather than a lifestyle, right? A commitment to saying, how do I really work this out with people? How do I show reconciliation and understanding and all those kinds of things? So I wonder if that backdrop, how that went for you in politics, or even you with the water stuff. I mean, you guys are in the nitty gritty of some things, or even Sam, what's gone on? You've seen maybe El Salvador, how you've seen some of those reconciliation things play out.
Well, let's talk a little bit about stay on water for a minute, because it does speak to reconciliation. It's interesting, Kyle. You talked about Dow and the Sierra Club and other municipal interests. Well, in working with that legislation, I was responsible for leading consensus planning efforts. So consensus means all sides are represented, including the extremes and the people in the middle and the other extremes. And so there's a level of, and a consensus-based process means while you may not fully support the decision, you can live with the decision. And I think that speaks to reconciliation and paths forward is nobody's going to get everything they want.
Right.
You never have a decisive victory in life.
Right.
It just really doesn't happen. You may think it does from time to time, but really you don't. And so finding ways where you can work with those around you of diverse views and achieve a consensus. Everybody's not happy, but everybody can live with it, and we can walk forward together on that path.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of one of the reconciliation paths. We can talk all kinds of things.
But that's
in El
really
Salvador.
practical, right, Sam? I mean, that's like real life. You know, that's what I say. Sometimes we want to make the big made-for-TV movie, like, but lots of times this reconciliation is just real life stuff about the water or how we're doing this. We're going to work this out together, right? Yeah.
There's another aspect to it, and that is this. Rarely do you see the lawmakers figure it out in such a way that 10%'s unhappy on this extreme, 10%'s unhappy on that extreme, and then most people are kind of okay with it. The happiest phrase that any legislator can be placed before them is an agreed-to bill. Anything that's big and important to business, to your constituents, to the state at large, is going to have some pros and cons to it. And when you file those bills or you take up that issue, it becomes a flashpoint. Your phones in your office are ringing and both sides are screaming and hollering, do this, do that, don't do the other thing. And so when the large groups that are representative, water folks, for example, come together with industry, come together with Sierra Club, come together with the surfing, believe it or not. The surfers are very interested in what happens with beaches and beach erosions. That's right. When here, this is an agreed-to bill. I've learned not to, that's right. When they learn that this is an agreed-to bill, a lot of the turmoil just sort of melts away.
Really?
Because you can stand up there and tell your colleagues this has been agreed to. Take one example. The doctors and the trial lawyers agreed on this medical liability or medical malpractice issue, for example. And so when you are able to come up with a consensus that was brought to you, and my point here is that we shouldn't be looking at government for all those answers. It's got a place. It's important. Render unto Caesar. But when you render unto Caesar and all you play in is Caesar's game, well, then everyone's at a disadvantage. What works far better is when those folks who are not under the pink dome get together, work things out, and say, here we go. We're still mad at each other, but we can live with this. And we each live to fight another day. And those are powerful moments when everybody works it out. The whole floor of the Senate will breathe a sigh of relief when they hear that ugly issue. And all you get to vote is yes, no, or present. And present ain't really good. Nobody gets elected and says, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to be present when they vote.
I'm here.
I'm going to be there. I'll be watching. So when you're faced with, I'm gonna vote yes or no, and a bunch of people are going to be mad at me, you take great comfort in knowing that a lot of those interested parties have worked this out. And so that route of reconciliation, in my opinion, is the preferred route rather than just say, okay, it's rock'em sock'em robots, red or blue, who's going to win? That's crazy.
So if I hear you right, sometimes this happens before you have to vote. Is that what I heard, or am I misunderstanding?
Oh, yes.
So these things can be worked out, much like in a trial, the two parties came to agreement before the judge had rendered the decision.
Because they weren't sure which way the judge or the jury was going. And they
Fascinating.
had to work it out.
News to me.
Big sigh of relief for you when that happens. Or even, as I hear those stories, again, I keep going, well, that brings me a little more hope in humanity, because it's not, those aren't the stories we hear, right? We just... Especially in some of these times that we're going through right now, it's just this or this. We don't get any of that, how people are working together. I think that begins to be inspiring for me.
But I want to make the point again, that comes from the grassroots. That's the groundswell, and not putting all of our desires in the hands of the lawmakers. Because if they compromise at all, well, now you're mad at them and you're going to go find an opponent against them and all that kind of nonsense, right? It's far better if you work it out and bring it to them, because you still have to vote on it.
Right.
You still have to have a change in legislation or not. But that grassroots effect is powerful. Because it's hard for anybody to stand up and go, well, the landscapers were right on this issue. Yeah, well, the landscapers agree with this compromise. What else have you got?
Yeah.
So it's powerful.
I have a question for both of you, and you brought something to mind to me. Jake and I were talking about this before we started. Take the have to vote yes, no, or present out of this for a second. Is there value in being the peacemaker, the centrist, the person who's in the middle that's trying to bring two parties together? I know, Sam, you've had to do some of that kind of work. So have you both had experiences where you as the elected official, you still knew that maybe some people in your party weren't seeing it the way they needed to, or vice versa, and you need to be in the middle? And Sam, just any stories you guys have about that, where you're pulling things together in the middle? Either of you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And certain members of the legislature become known as being the one that's the cool, calm, collected, not invested too much in one side or the other, but rather they're the Obi-Wan Kenobi that you can go to, right? They're the ones that end up carrying some of the bigger bills. They're the ones that end up being in charge of the committees, Appropriations Committee in the House, Senate Finance in the Senate, or State Affairs in both the House and the Senate, where you get these very large issues that have huge overspill into other areas, going with the water metaphor here. But yes, there are always those that everybody says, okay, he's a bomb thrower, she's a bomb thrower, Janek, he's just dumb. What to do with him? And so we're going to find somebody else who will bring it all together. That's fair.
Do you have some of those stories, Sam, too? I think that's a great question, Kevin. Do you have some of those things?
He nodded when I said Janek is dumb.
No, I guess one example in implementing one of the bills that went through, Senate Bill 3 during Kyle's tenure, I was chairing a committee, and we had a legislative directive to prepare a report. It's in statute, so we have a deadline, and we have to do it. And I'm leading a committee with most of the people would be on a different end of the spectrum from me in what their objectives and goals were. And there are one or two people my direction and a lot of people in a different direction, much more towards Sierra Club than Dow, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And so in a leadership or a peacemaker role, we have to deliver. A deadline is always good, and a common goal is always good to bring people together. Mm-hmm. A deadline and a common goal. We all wanted to get a report in. It's just what that report was going to have in it. And so the challenges are taking little steps and little pieces. We're gonna debate this issue, and we're going to try to reach consensus. And if we don't, we're going to vote. And then we're going to take the next step and cut off another slice toward the goal and the objective. We'll try to reach consensus. If we can, we will. And if we can't, we'll vote. And just keep moving on. But it's those little steps allowing each person to be heard, which makes for a long, tedious, stressful process. But in the end, you take it a little bit at a time. We all have a common goal. We all have a deadline. And you get to a consensus.
Wisdom.
Yeah.
Well,
very little, I think,
have to do it.
I think very little is as frustrating for people who pour their heart and soul into something and then feel like they weren't heard, or they were heard, but eyes were rolling, nobody was listening, nobody had any intention of taking what they say into account. And so when people get a little say in that, and they get some ability. Again, I'm going back to that grassroots effort, and this impacts. It can impact what a church does, and how people approach these things from a different perspective. Not, I'm going to vote this way on election day, and then I'm going to get my popcorn and I'm going to watch the fight. Right? Mm-hmm. It's far better when somebody else comes up with a way. I was listening to a podcast about 6 months ago about one of these organizations around the country that would match money. So they'd get money from their parishioners, and then they would go pool that money and they go to some folks that had huge healthcare bills and say, okay, we're going to give you 10 cents on the dollar. There you go. Our parishioners have put money in, and we're going to pay off this person's bills. We don't have enough for the entire bill, but we're going to pay off, whatever it is, 10 cents, 20 cents, 25 cents on the dollar. And so that bill gets taken care of. That kind of hands-on approach is frequently much more satisfying for people than take my tax money and you're going to go pay for somebody else's health care. You see that difference? Because government will take that power away from you. Government won't let you be the good guy, if you will. Government wants no, I've got to be able to do this, and I've got to author the bill that's going to give the money to take care of people's health care bills, because that's how I get fame and power. So those grassroots things where somebody gets a little say, just like the pop-up stores where we don't give toys to folks, we sell them to folks.
Dignity.
And give them dignity, give them hope. If I had my notes, I'd go through the other points that Dave made the other day.
You like that in the sermon, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, Sam, that speaks a lot to our partnership in El Salvador about, and I've seen you do this over and over and over again, and it's beautiful, is it's not us saying, here's what we're going to do, we're a Riverbend, we're whatever else. It's going and say, okay, what is God doing in here? How can I come be a part of solutions? And I think there's a lot of dignity in that too. There's a lot of respect. You carry this. I've watched you. You carry such respect for the culture of the Salvadorian, your family. Your familia. How important is that? And two things you said about us coming together. You said we come together around a goal, and even that, but that respect and that stuff you have for El Salvador. You've seen that play out in a bunch of ways, right?
Well, in the Salvadoran community, our entree into that community is in a missionary role. That's our entree, or at least what we thought it was in the beginning. But I think, as is often the case, when we enter a foreign community, a strange community, where we're the outsiders, our preconceived notions are pretty well dashed, and we're certainly not bringing God to Latin America. God's already there and been working for 2,000 plus 4,000 since the beginning of time. And what we can bring, though, is encouragement and funding. Frankly, what we have, what our gifts are, and our ability to share. In a community like that, the Salvadoran community is economically challenged, and they are structurally challenged in terms of government corruption. 4 of their last 5 presidents are in jail. Their current president was elected, but not from either of the 2 controlling parties within the country. And so the president's at war with their legislature right now. So the government structure is very challenging. And then they have community struggles between the gang influence, 2 to 3 rival gangs struggling for territory, and the police. Some of the gang members would refer to the police as just another gang.
The third gang, right? Yeah.
The government might have a different view of that.
Right.
But it's the only path forward for them, or one of the only paths forward, is through faith in God. And while with some of our economic advantages here, we can make our way, right, with money or pride or whatever we think we can do, and privilege. But they're without money and without pride, because the gang's beating down your door and threaten your family's life, so you have to knuckle under and bow your head or be killed. Yeah. You have to turn to God. And what's been amazingly cool in our time there to observe is the reconciliation between the church and the gang community. Yeah. They don't necessarily love what each other do. Obviously,
Church and a
There-
gang.
there-
Yeah.
there's some sin involved there.
Yeah.
But there is a key mutual goal that has been a thread through it all, is the education of the children. The Salvadoran Church runs a school for 200 or more kids in the community. Those kids are the gang members' children. They may do bad things, but they still love their kids, and they still want their kids to have a better life. So that is a shared goal that they can find ways to work together on.
Yeah.
And the Holy Spirit makes that possible.
Right.
River Bend plays a little role. We give encouragement, we give funding, we come and work shoulder to shoulder with them when we can. But we have the same common goal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think anybody who's been there senses that and feels that. You've been a huge part of that. You and your wife have, and others. There is that sense, and you feel, and it's an interesting thing. When you talk about crossing red and blue, now we go talking about crossing borders and language barriers and cultural barriers. It's interesting. I think I kind of came in maybe because I was a little bit messed with the election season and everything. I was like, how do we get to the place of reconciliation? But as I talk to you guys, I'm like, well, maybe it's actually going on. We just aren't talking about it. That's kind of how I don't know, Kevin, if you feel that way too.
It's interesting because, you guys are just so chill.
Yeah.
You just make it seem so easy.
Yeah, they're like, no problem. We're just going to
but
get everybody together, grassroots. We're going to be like,
but don't forget the wisdom they're saying here is that there's common goals. You got to find that place where you find the common goal. But let's face it, we have a culture that's cancel culture, that's shame-based with social media. This is just what we do now, I had written some stuff down too, and I had written down how Katy Perry is being eviscerated, and I think she was just innocently just saying, "Hey, let's just be nice to each other." And did you hear that story at all? All right.
I was sharing with Jake earlier tonight. I may have said this before, but this is probably 12 years ago. The longest Facebook post that I've ever had in my entire life, as far as comments, it was like 300 and something, almost up to 400. Was in a moment I was like, all right, I've had it. This side over here, you suck, and this side over here, you suck, and I'm done. And neither of you are representing the church. And I was like, all just verbally threw up on Facebook,
But it's like we have these expressions now. We just can't wait to slam somebody.
But I got beat up from both sides, dude.
Yeah.
For to almost 400 comments. It was like, I ain't doing that again. I mean, I was a dummy too in that whole thing, but that was 12 years ago. It was like
Kyle, I'm curious for you. Did you experience did anybody just demonize the heck out of you? Did you have an
Oh,
experience?
sure.
Or you were the devil?
how do you deal with that, man? That just seems horrible.
When I left office, I went to run a state agency. I'd been back in medical practice for a few years, and I went to run a state agency. Governor Perry appointed me to, and it's a huge agency, billions and billions of dollars at stake, Health and Human Services, and there were things that went on before I even got there, and all of a sudden I'm being demonized because things that happened before I got there. It's a bad story, and my picture, because I'm now
The guy.
the head of the
You're the guy,
agency,
yeah.
my picture's on the paper. And you can only get to the point where you just say, it's almost laughable. I'll ask them to say that all that happened before I took the job. They won't. It's fine. At some point, you realize they're talking about somebody that doesn't exist. Yeah, they're using my photo and my name, but they're talking about somebody that doesn't exist.
Right.
And I've had campaign photographs where grainy, black and white, no color, fire coming out of my eyes and that sort of thing. I'm just like, well, it was nicely done, or it was imaginative or something. At some point, it's not, they're talking about somebody that doesn't exist.
Nice color palette that you put in there,
And Sam, have you had to experience anything in El Salvador where you thought you were doing the right thing, that you felt like, I think I've got the right intentions and the right motives, and I'm trying to bring some sides together and do all these right things, but you just were like, oh, he's one of them. He's an American. He's this, he's or that. Did you have to overcome any of that? I know you're a pretty cool dude, but just maybe somebody misread you once.
Well, I think one of the things that I learned down there as a gringo is that it takes time and it takes a personal relationship. Kevin, you were talking about social media. Well, people will say things, they'll pack things away on their keyboard that they'd never say to somebody sitting next to them or sitting across from them. So the value of personal interaction and the time that it takes to look somebody in the eye and understand, that's why you think what you think. And you have reasons for that.
Yeah.
And taking the time to understand exactly what that reason is, as opposed to just a quick flyby.
Right. And sometimes it's humbling because when we look in the mirror, we usually think we're cool, we're smarter than the average bear, as you said earlier. But then you realize after listening for a while, well, I know a few things, but I was probably a little off base on this one. And being able to, I think, being able to admit that and to just go, oh, you're right. I'm sorry, I was off base. Let me listen more carefully and try to follow your lead and understand more fully why you're taking the direction or the viewpoint that you are. In El Salvador, we come in, we're Americans, we come in with projects, physical structures. Money goes toward physical structure, which makes a great picture. Well, the real structure and the real common goal is souls who will understand that Jesus Christ is the path, and education of children. And those structures can be one means of facilitation. But that's something that I think I had to learn, and I think in all our efforts we have to go into a community and learn that, and come back to the goals. Come back to the goals.
And those things take time.
And they take time.
When your only interface with somebody is a headline, they read about you, they're not going to talk to you. You live half a country away. They're just going to make up their minds about you, and they're going to put you in whatever little cubby hole they think you belong in. But it's different when I would imagine you've seen things evolve over time. Repeatedly, you'll see new people, you'll see some old friends when you go down there. But over time, it's that reputation. When I would think that when folks know you're there out of being driven by faith, and they have prayers for certain things, and you're actually bringing the answers to some of those, and this is how God made it work for them. I would see that evolve in such a way that people develop that trust over time.
Yeah, and vice versa, because they're answering prayers for us too.
Yeah.
I mean, Riverbend Church has moved in a much more outward direction over the last 15 years than we had before. Riverbend Church was a destination before, and now it's a recharge source, moving out into the world, and that's exciting. But we didn't just get there on our own. There was some influence. There were gifts shared from south of our border that changed hearts and changed minds and changed directions.
Yeah. I think a common
So
thing.
in fact, I carry a little thing in my wallet. There's a really cool quote that I keep. If you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Wow.
See, that right there could go to so many different situations, right?
I think we have to retitle this podcast. This is no longer this is wisdom talk from
No
two,
kidding, dude, man.
two dudes who've been through it.
This is cool about this, though. Like, we get in these things, and I'm like, well, we're going to talk about reconciliation. Nope. This is like, Sam, can you read it one more time? Because it's really, like, we got to figure out how to get that on the screen and save that sucker somehow.
Well, it's attributed to an Aboriginal artist named Lila Watson. If you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together.
Man,
when you come, it's not in a giver-recipient fashion. Everybody gets something out of it. This goes back to Dave's sermon the other day. I've been on, I'm a tiny cog on, I've been a tiny cog on a few medical missions in Guatemala. Cool. Nothing like this. The closest we got to it was one time we canceled the trip because the State Department said, there's a rumor down there that y'all are going to go down there and steal kids' kidneys and bring them back to the States. We had been
maybe
doing
we
this
did do that a little bit.
We've been doing this for a while, and we hadn't. This came from out in the outlying parts, not amongst the folks in the clinic and the orphanage and the church where we were, but. That's a really bad scenario, as you can imagine, so we didn't go. I can tell you this. Since I got back, and I only did about 3 of them, it's nothing compared to yours, but the first one was probably over 25 years ago, and since I got back, I do not complain about waiting in line at a grocery store or a movie or anything. Because we would come out at night and there's a line of people who hope to get their surgery done, and we've been working for 14 hours and we're going to stop and we'll start again in the morning, and they would say, thank you. And they're there the next morning lined up, hoping to get theirs. I would get mad if I had to wait, 15 minutes in a grocery line, or if somebody else, I thought I was ahead of them, but they got to the front of the line before me. That was incredibly peaceful for me to come back and say, man, I got it good. I'm not going to complain about things like that.
So I think it's interesting we started talking about reconciliation. We've basically landed at serving people, serving others.
It's interesting because I was going to ask a question, and it goes right along with this, Aaron. Sorry to interrupt.
No, good.
Does reconciliation require sacrifice?
Sure.
That's one of my things. I think you have to have it. Like real sacrifice has to come from.
But let's talk about the different types of sacrifice. I've heard you say things like, well, we have to spend time with each other. It's going to take time. You just can't gloss over the topics. You have to really listen to where a person's coming from. What are some other sacrifices we have to make to be able to be good reconcilers or people who reconcile well?
I think you think it's sacrifice your own pride, don't you think?
Pride.
It depends on the situation. I think reconciliation is it's a physical movement, and by that I mean there's effort that's put into it, right? It's mental effort, it's emotion, whatever it is, but energy is put in. And the laws of thermodynamics say that energy is not all 100% going to be there. Some will be spun off as waste, right? To me, you have to look and say, okay, what am I really sacrificing? All right? Am I saving face because I said, no way, no how will I ever vote for a member of the Green Party or the Libertarian Party? And here's one that actually is kind of better than the other candidates. Okay, I'm going to vote for the Libertarian. What are you really giving up? And so much we get so wrapped up into winning, losing, and I'm not allergic to winning. I'm not used to it.
I'm not allergic to winning.
I'm not used to it.
Yeah.
But it's not like I think it's bad, winning and losing, but you can't just say that everything hinges on that. So yes, I think there's always going to be some sacrifice. How important really is it to you to give up something to get more of what you'd like to have, and then the issue goes away for a while, and you can focus your energies on other things. I think it's without saying some sacrifice has to be, or else you wouldn't even be discussing it with somebody.
Yeah.
It just would happen.
Yeah.
It's
You
really
always have to realize in anything you're not going to get everything you want. Sometimes a half a loaf is better than no loaf. We all got to eat, and you'll take abuse from people who wanted the full loaf and people who didn't want to share that loaf with you at all. But you got to be prepared to give up something to reach middle ground.
And you can do it without sacrificing principles. I want to make that point, because I believe that most of the time you can. Okay. You don't have to sell your soul.
Or integrity. How about
or
integrity?
your integrity. You don't. you may walk back on what you thought was a dead solid promise that you made. In retrospect, you didn't have enough information, you popped off too early, whatever it was. So you may have to walk some things back, but that only matters if you're sacrificing a principle. Then it's bad. But if you're not sacrificing an important principle, a core principle for yourself, be it your faith, your devotion to your family, whatever it is, and you can make that compromise. I hate to say it because it's gotten to be such an ugly word. It sounds like it's middle of the road. What's in the middle of the road? Dead animals and a yellow stripe. But that's right. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to. The world doesn't turn gray because everybody compromised. It turns checkerboard, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes you get rained out.
All right, Jake, you hear that?
Yeah, there's some wisdom going on for everybody.
Jake doesn't like
over here.
centrist. He's like, just do something.
I shared a story with these guys earlier, and it's one of my favorite. When you talk about sacrifice, I grew up as a missions kid. Basically, my parents wanted to be missionaries, but we ended up being pastors instead of always bringing missionaries into our church. And one of those guys named Don Richardson came, and he was a missionary. He wrote a book. He'd go out into these tribal places and like live with the tribe, translate their language into something, and then share kind of the biblical message with them, right? So he does that. He goes through the whole thing. With this tribe, he goes through the story, Jesus' story, the gospel story, and he gets to the Judas part, and they cheer. And he's like, what? They cheer. They're like, he's like the hero of the story. And he's going, oh, what am I doing? They're like, they value deception and like the look you're giving me is like how he felt too. Like, what do I do with this? Kind of goes back to the drawing board. Like, what am I going to do? Well, this tribe was fighting at war with another tribe, and somehow in the midst of this, the tribe leader who had a son takes this son to the other tribe and says, and as a baby says, "Here's my son. You're going to raise my son. As long as my son's okay, and he's alive and well and healthy, we're going to be at peace." And it clicked for me. He's like, peace child. And that idea of reconciliation and God, our creator, and how that all wrapped together as that moment kind of hit him, like you're seeing too. And he wrote this whole book called Peace Child. But there's such a great example, and it's a deep sacrifice of saying, okay, if I'm going to reconcile with people I'm at war with or fighting with about water rights or whatever the things is, they think there is a part of us that does say at some point, I got to give a piece of myself up. Not giving up my principles, but there's a part of me that says, I'm giving this to do this, or whether it's cross-cultural or those things. It's all different levels and nuances of that, but I think there's an intrinsic connection of sacrifice and reconciliation for me.
Well, even in the example of Christ, and you mentioned the story about Judas, well, Christ and Judas would appear to be at cross purposes, but Jesus washed his feet too. He washed Judas' feet too.
Yeah.
So when we're sitting around thinking about, can we sit in the same room and talk with somebody that we're on the other end of the political spectrum from, or on cross purposes? Well, hey, if we're saying we're followers of Jesus, start washing some feet and start sitting and listening.
Dudes, I think you guys should have your own show, number one. We should be charging for this, number two, for the wisdom we're dispensing tonight.
Yes.
That just crushed me right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That just got me.
Well, and I think you just accentuated so well. I think the reason why we've come together at Riverbend, and to do that together, because it is this beautifully mysterious place where you can be over here and over here, over there, and we come together, and it's wonderful.
Hey,
really
I've
well.
got a couple comments I'm
Yeah.
going to read out here, and some person says Bev and Sam Vaugh. I don't know who that handle is. Let's wonder who that
She
is.
might be trolling us.
She might be
She-
trolling tonight, yeah.
She wanted to remind us that so the sacrifice of his son was to have the future be different from the past. Very, very true. Steve Schaefer. Hey, Steve, what's going on? Reconciliation is impossible without humility. I think we kind of covered that a little
Yeah.
bit. Kyle, you mentioned that maybe. So thank you guys for commenting.
So I have one more question for you, because I think it kind of will help wrap some of this up too. And I think this is where I've really landed a lot is we've talked about this and how it goes, but I want us to land here. How do we, in this room, really push back against drawing lines and tribalism in our faith and our politics and our communities? I think you guys have given some good examples, but I'd love to kind of hear you how you would sum that particular question of how do we, because it does come to me that very tribalistic red, blue, California, Texas, however you're going to label it, El Salvador Americans, maybe more Mexico and Americas where we find that line a little bit more. But you guys have so much wisdom. I'm really interested to hear what you think, how we push back on those things.
Well, I think I jump in and help with logistics on Kyle's next medical trip.
There you go. He is an amazing logistics guy too. He's like,
Did I just get signed up for something? I just got signed
got-
up for something.
we have a term here that was from another pastor called voluntold.
Voluntold.
I know who that
Oh,
pastor is.
Yeah.
We love him dearly.
Well, let me say, I think that Christ told us, love your brother as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to love that person that's rioting half a continent away. You don't know them. You don't know about their family. You don't know how they grew up. You don't know anything about them. There was a snippet. You do know people who feel much the same way. Maybe they actually went out and protested. I don't know. But you do know people who are local to you, and sit and visit with them. Those things can have a powerful impact, right? There's no point me flying or driving to Portland and grab one of the rioters to go, we ought to have a beverage and talk about this.
You can say beer.
I'm not a beer drinker.
Scotch.
Finding people who feel that way and still being friends with them and talking about it openly, this nonsense about you can't mention it. We're sitting here talking about religion and politics tonight. Those are the taboos.
Yeah.
What?
Don't discuss that
We
with
are?
your friends.
We don't do
We're
this
not
at
supposed to
Thanksgiving.
do that.
We don't do this at Thanksgiving dinner. It's coming up.
Cut this off. We're not supposed to be talking about faith and
Yeah.
politics.
So the ability to just take to somebody else and just go, well, yeah, I think you're crazy. Yeah, I think you're nuts. Okay.
All right. Let's have a drink.
About lunch.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
One of the nurses in the operating room, one of the charge nurses, he's as far politically from me as you can get. We talk about the Houston Texans and the Houston Astros. And suddenly that gap's not quite so big.
Right.
It's important. Don't get me wrong. These issues are important. How much of your money the government takes, what the government does, the services they provide, all that sort of thing. That is important, and I will not diminish that. But it doesn't have to be as rancorous. If you find somebody else and say, okay, there's got to be some other things we talk about. How about the Astros? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when national media is criticizing my Astros for doing what everybody else was doing.
Now you're bonded.
Yeah, now we're bonded.
Here we go.
We have a common
Bring it on,
enemy.
yeah.
We have a common enemy.
Dodger fans,
right?
call in now. That number again.
There
Call
we
in.
go. So I think that those things do carry over. Mm-hmm. They impact locally. Other folks watch you and say, "Oh, those two guys are both clowns. They yell at each other and all that," without being afraid to say something. Talk about it. One of the nurses that I practiced with, finally the other day, right before the election, said, "I'm voting for the other team." Okay, I've held back for 3 years without letting you know that I vote for the other team. It's fine. What do I mean? It's not like I don't think I'm an ogre. Maybe I'm an ogre, but it's okay. Just talk about it.
Yeah.
Give each other a hard time, and then these things come around. And when the economy does well or collapses, one side gets to point the finger jokingly. Mm-hmm. But so go back to your question. I think the best way is to start locally and get out of this mindset of I'm going to make a decision about that person over there and that's it. And whatever they think, I think exactly the opposite. When there's somebody close to me that I know, we could have a conversation about it. And I can do that without compromising my principles. Mm-hmm. Something that's important to me, I'm not going to meet you in the middle of the road when it is a hard and fast principle with me. Yeah. I'm not.
That's integrity.
We can talk about it. I'll tell you to your face, you're nuts. You say the same thing to me. Now let's go have that beer.
There you go. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I think it's a pathway to get to moving forward in common ground is to find to narrow your focus to a certain thing. One of my favorite examples is I work with a lot of guys who are at the other end of the political spectrum from me. They're a lot more conservative than I am. And my daughter was off in college, and she sent me this thing. She said, hey, there's this cool thing online where it's solved the deficit. And you go through all the programs on what you're going to cut and adjust to solve the national debt. And so I said, all right. So I took that, and I went to my 180-degree guy. We work together all the time. We're good friends. But we don't agree when it comes to the blue and the red things. And I said, hey, do this. I'm going to go do this, you do this, and let's look at it after. And after we did that, it was remarkable. I mean, we're talking out of 100% of the money, we were less than 5% different, okay, on how to solve the deficit. And that's a big thing.
That's a really big thing, yeah.
Legislatures have argued about that for a generation, and they haven't solved it either. But from complete different ends of the spectrum, when we narrowed in to, well, we both want to solve this.
Yeah.
We'd both like this to go away. Let's go see how we would do that. And the similarities in how we would attack it were remarkable.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't always work that way. It can't always work that way. And you can't give up your principles because we all got to have integrity. But when we should never miss the common ground when it exists because we're too impatient to listen or have already put somebody in a corner or already painted them red or already painted them blue. Pick a target. Pick something that could be a common goal. Educating children. Following Jesus. Doing the right thing every time you get a chance.
Right.
Those are common goals. Narrow in on something and see. You might be surprised how it's not as far apart as you think.
Yeah. Man, I'm telling you. Yeah. You guys, I really have loved having you here. I feel like I came in with questions, but I think I learned a lot more from just sitting with you two, just the wisdom from it. I think Kevin said it a bunch tonight. It's been just a real joy to have you guys here. As I've listened to you tonight, I was so desperately, the cynic in me that I told you I started with, I so desperately want this for my local community and for my country and really for the world. I don't know how we package this and put it out there, but I know this is a good start, hopefully, of us at least digging in and going after it. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Kevin, John, Jake, all you guys, our crew here making this thing happen.
Everybody online, some person named Hannah Vaugh. Anybody know? Hannah, good to have you on with us tonight too.
So are we having a hymn sing tomorrow night?
We are having a hymn sing, and I forgot to ask Carlton, Susie. Sorry, I forgot to ask who's on hymn sing, but that thing's just taken off. It's got its own energy, but it's going to be Carlton and someone else.
And join us Sunday. We have a great series going on that Dave's going through, and we'd love to have you online or in person. So
and Immerse next Tuesday.
Immerse next Tuesday, which would be awesome. So join us for those things. Bring your friends to these things. Get online and hang with us. Thanks for being here tonight. Thank you guys again for great discussion. It was really, really wonderful. Thank you guys. Have a great night tonight.